Welcome to 21st Sports Recap and Reaction for the Cincinnati Bengals at the Arizona Cardinals in their Week 11 matchup played November 22nd, 2015 on Sunday Night Football. So heading into this game, the Bengals had only lost once, and the Cardinals had only lost twice, both teams in first place in their respective divisions. We're going to go over every possession, and we're going to go over the stats and give our breakdown and analysis for this game. So to start things off, the Cardinals would get the ball first, and they would actually move into Cincinnati territory, but on 2nd and 10 from the Cincinnati 46, Carson Palmer was sacked by Geno Atkins. That set up 3rd and 20 from the Arizona 44, and Carson Palmer was intercepted by Hall, and so now Cincinnati would take over, but they weren't able to turn that turnover into points as they ended up punting after 6 plays. The Cardinals would go 3 and out on their next possession, and so would the Bengals on their possession following. And so now the Cardinals, after that 3 and out by the Bengals, would get the ball on their own 37. And on the first play of this possession, Carson Palmer threw his second interception. This time, Nelson coming down with it. And so now the Bengals would take over on their own 36. Dalton went to A.J. Green. He picked up 42 yards, and that brought the ball to the Arizona 22. Then on 2nd and 8 from the 20, Dalton goes to Giovanni Bernard, and he picks up 11 to make it a first down on the 9. So first and goal from the 9. And then Sanu scores on a touchdown, but a penalty would bring it back. So a holding penalty would make it first and goal on the 17. But then on second and goal from the 15, Dalton goes back to Bernard. He picks up 12 to set up 3rd and goal on the 3. And Andy Dalton finds the tight end Tyler Eifert for the 3-yard touchdown pass. And now Mike Nugent would add the extra point, and it was 7-0 as the Bengals put the first points on the scoreboard with less than half a minute left in the first quarter. So now the Cardinals would take over on their own 20 after the touchback, bring the first quarter to a close. And then in the second quarter, on their second play of the second quarter, their third play of this possession on 3rd and 8 from the 22, Palmer would go to John Brown. He picked up 12 yards, and an unnecessary roughness penalty would make it a first down on the Arizona 49 as they got to midfield. And then they ended up being faced with a 3rd and 16 from the 50. Palmer went to J.J. Nelson, the rookie from UAB, picked in the 5th round. He picked up 23 yards on this catch, and that was just the start of what would be a pretty big game for J.J. Nelson, as he actually had the biggest game of his career thus far here in his rookie season. But now it was a first down on the Cincinnati 27. They would then be faced with a 3rd and 1 a couple plays later from the 18 in the red zone, and Carson Palmer goes to the tight end Darren Fells for an 18-yard touchdown. Chandler Cantanzaro added the extra point, and this game was tied at 7 with less than 10 minutes left before halftime. So now the Bengals would take over after the touchback on their own 20, and they would end up moving the ball towards midfield and into Arizona territory. And on 2nd and 10 from the Arizona 43, Andy Dalton went to Giovanni Bernard for a 41-yard reception. And so now the Bengals would take their second time out of the first half, as there was just over a minute left to play before halftime, and it was first and goal on the 2. They gave it to Jeremy Hill, and he punched it in for the 2-yard touchdown. Nugent added the extra point, and it was now 14-7 as the Bengals took back the lead. And that catch by Bernard was just nearly a touchdown, but he ended up down at the 2 before Hill punched it in there for that score. So now the Cardinals would get the ball with just over a minute left before halftime, but they would go 3 and out on this possession. They would end up having to punt to the Bengals. The Bengals would end up just running out the clock, and it would go to halftime with Cincinnati up 14-7. So now to start off the second half, Cincinnati would get the ball first, but they would punt after 5 plays. Now Arizona would take over on their own 20 after the punt. And on 3rd and 7 from the Arizona 23, Carson Palmer hits John Brown for a 13-yard reception. Now it's 1st and 10 on the Arizona 36. Carson Palmer airs it out for J.J. Nelson, and it's a 64-yard touchdown, the first touchdown of J.J. Nelson's career. As I said, the rookie from UAB, a 5th-round pick for the Arizona Cardinals. So now, with the extra point by Chandler Cantanzaro, the score was tied up at 14 apiece, with about 11.5, just under 11.5 minutes left to play in the third. The Bengals would go 3 and out on their next possession and punt the ball back to Arizona. The Cardinals would take over on their own 34 after the punt, and they would end up moving the ball into Cincinnati territory and into the red zone. And on 2nd and 1 from the Cincinnati 18, Carson Palmer hits John Brown for an 18-yard touchdown. Cantanzaro adds the extra point, and now the Cardinals are in the lead for the first time in this game with the score 21-14 with about 5.5 minutes left to play in the third. The Bengals would now go 3 and out once again and have to punt it back to the Cardinals. The Cardinals were faced with a 3rd and 14 from their own 47. Carson Palmer went to J.J. Nelson. The rookie comes up big once again, a 36-yard reception that would bring the ball into the red zone at the Cincinnati 17. And then 2 plays later on 2nd and 9 from the 16, Carson Palmer hits David Johnson for a 16-yard touchdown. Cantanzaro adds the extra point, and it was now 28-14 as the Cardinals had scored 21 straight points in the third quarter as Carson Palmer threw his 4th touchdown of the game. So now the Cardinals up by 2 scores with a minute and a half left to play in the third. The Bengals would get the ball on their own 20 after the touchback, and they would bring the third quarter to a close in Arizona territory. And then on the Arizona 32, they would actually bring it up to the 22 with a 10-yard run by Bernard, but then Andy Dalton is sacked by Buchanan for an 11-yard loss, moving the Bengals back to the Arizona 33. And so now they would end up being faced with a 3rd and 26 from the 38 after a penalty moved them back even further 2 plays earlier. And Andy Dalton goes to Jones. Marvin Jones picks up 22, but he's shy of the first down. It's 4th and 4 on the Arizona 16 in the red zone, down by 2 touchdowns. Less than 13 minutes left to play in this game, and the Bengals elect to go for it. And Andy Dalton goes to Mohamed Sanu. He picks up 10 and the first down on the 6, and it's now 1st and goal for the Bengals. Dalton then runs for 5 yards as he narrowly scores, and on 2nd and goal from the 1, Jeremy Hill punches it in for a 1-yard touchdown. Nugent adds the extra point, and it's now a 1-score game with the score Arizona 28, Cincinnati 21. The Cardinals would then punt after 5 plays on their next possession, and the Bengals would take over with about 9 minutes left to play on their own 17 after the punt as they trail by 7. They would be faced with a 3rd and 10 from the 17. Andy Dalton was sacked by Golden. He forces the fumble, recovered by Buchanan. And now Arizona would take over on their own on the Cincinnati 10-yard line, 1st and goal. So 1st and goal for the Cardinals, and they would end up losing some yards on 2nd and goal from the 8 when Palmer was sacked, and he actually fumbled it, but it was recovered by the Cardinals. So they got the ball. They're on the 14. It's still 3rd and goal now. And Carson Palmer goes to Fitzgerald. He picks up 8 yards, but they would be forced to settle for a 24-yard field goal attempt by Chandler Cantanzaro. And so they put 3 on the scoreboard, and the score was now 31-21 as the Cardinals extended their lead to 10. The Bengals, now trailing by 2 scores with about 6.5 minutes left to play in this game, would end up getting a big kick return by Tate, setting them up on the 50-yard line to begin their drive. But Dalton sacked on 1st down by Gunter, loses 10 yards. But on 2nd and 20, Dalton goes to Bernard. He picks up 21. Now it's a 1st down on the Arizona 39. 29. Then faced with a 3rd and 3 from the 32. Dalton goes to Sanu. He picks up 9 yards. And then a penalty, but it was declined. So it's 1st and 10 on the 23. Dalton goes to Green. He picks up 13. Now it's a 1st and goal on the 10. Then after an incomplete pass, 2nd and goal on the 10. Dalton to Eifert as they connect for the second time for a touchdown in this game. A 10-yard touchdown with the extra point by Nugent made it a 3-point game with the score Arizona 31, Cincinnati 28. The Cardinals would then go 3 and out on their next possession as the Bengals defense came up with a big stop and got the ball back for their offense as they would take over on their own 16 after the punt. They would move the ball towards midfield, and on 1st and 10 from their own 37, Dalton goes to Giovanni Bernardi, picks up 30 yards and a first down at the Arizona 33. Then they would actually have their drive come to a stall. They would have to settle for a 43-yard field goal attempt on 4th and 2 from the Arizona 25, and Nugent kicked it through the uprights to tie this game at 31 apiece. So this game is tied up with just over a minute left to play in regulation. It looks like it's going to go to overtime, but Carson Palmer had other ideas. So now on 1st and 10 from the Arizona 16, Carson Palmer hit the rookie J.J. Nelson for a 19-yard reception to bring the ball to the 35. Palmer then went to Larry Fitzgerald. He picked up 18 yards to move the ball across midfield to the Cincinnati 47. But they had to review it as it looked like it might have been a fumble, but it was out of bounds, and so they ruled that it was not forced, as they ruled that Fitzgerald threw the ball out of bounds while trying to advance, and so it was a 1st and 10 on the Cincinnati 47. Carson Palmer then goes back to Larry Fitzgerald. He picks up 20 yards, and now it's a 1st and 10 on the Cincinnati 27. Palmer rushing up to the line, spikes the ball to stop the clock with 20 seconds left to play. Palmer then kneels on the ball to set up for the field goal attempt by Chandler Cantanzaro. And then as they set up for the field goal, it was actually 3rd and 11, but Pico got called for unsportsmanlike conduct. And what it was that he was apparently calling out the offensive signals, and the ref heard it and called him for unsportsmanlike conduct as he was trying to draw the Cardinals off sides. And so now that would set the ball up for a 32-yard attempt as they move the ball half the distance to the goal, as it would have been a 46-yard attempt before the penalty, but instead a 32-yard attempt. Chandler Cantanzaro puts it through the uprights. That puts the Cardinals back in the lead now by 3 with the score 34-31, and they would actually still have to kick the ball off, and on the kickoff, they ended up whistling the play dead with a forward pass on the lateral. And so the Arizona Cardinals win this game by 3 in a wild finish in that 4th quarter, a wild second half, as we end up seeing 44 points scored in the second half after just 21 points total in the first half. And of course, in that 4th quarter, the Bengals trying to rally, scoring 17, but they come up just short. It's the Cardinals win this one. They improve to 8-2. The Bengals fall to 8-2. Both teams respectively 4-1 as in home versus away, with the Cardinals now 4-1 at home and the Bengals losing their first game on the road this season. So the Cardinals, the first team to beat the Bengals on the road, and the Bengals lose their second straight game. Of course, they're still in first place in their division by 2 games, and the Cardinals are in first place in their division by 3. So it was quite the game, quite a wild game. Carson Palmer coming up clutch in that 3rd quarter after, having those 2 interceptions in the first half, but then he comes up big. Of course, he had that touchdown in the 2nd quarter, and then the 3 in the 3rd to make that 4 touchdowns on the game for Carson Palmer. Says things, sometimes he gets intercepted, but he comes back and he'll get his team into the end zone. And the Bengals, they didn't lay down, they didn't give up, even down by 2 scores in the 3rd quarter. And they came back in the 4th and they tied this game up with just over a minute left to play. They showed a lot of heart, especially Andy Dalton. Bernard had a really big game as well. But Arizona, in the end, coming up with that field goal by Chandler Cantanzaro. Cantanzaro's his only, his second field goal of the game. He did not have a field goal until the fourth quarter, but he comes up with those 2 field goals when they needed them. And of course, that penalty ended up costing the Bengals there at the end. Who knows what would have happened if it had been a 46-yard attempt. Of course, Chandler Cantanzaro has been known to hit some field goals from longer ranges, but I believe he's hit one from 56. But let's look at the stats in this game. Carson Palmer, 20 of 31, 317 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Andy Dalton, 22 for 39, 315 yards passing, and 2 touchdowns. And on the ground in this game, the leading rusher was Chris Johnson with 18 carries for 64 yards. And for the Bengals, Jeremy Hill with 13 carries for 45 yards and 2 touchdowns. Dalton also had 8 carries for 34 yards. Giovanni Bernard had 6 carries for 18 yards, but he was the leading receiver for the Bengals with 8 receptions for 128 yards, which gave him a total of 146 yards in this game. But the leading receiver in the game, the rookie from UAB out of the 5th round, J.J. Nelson, comes up big. 4 receptions for 142 yards and a touchdown in this game. Larry Fitzgerald also 8 receptions for 90 yards. The former Panther, but that was quite a while ago. But John Brown, he had 3 receptions for 43 yards and a touchdown. Fells, his only reception was an 18-yard touchdown. And, of course, the rookie David Johnson, 2 receptions for 17 yards and a touchdown as well. A.J. Green for Cincinnati had 4 receptions for 79 yards. Marvin Jones, 4 receptions for 60 yards. And Tyler Eifert, the Bengals tight end, 3 receptions for 22 yards, 2 of which were touchdowns. And for the kickers in this game, Cantanzaro 2 for 2 on the field goals, 4 for 4 on the extra points. Nugent 1 for 1 on the field goals, 4 for 4 on the extra points, as both kickers were perfect in the game. And on defense for the Cardinals, Buchanan and Golden, Freeney and Gunter each had sacks. Dwight Freeney with the sack, the former Colt. But also Golden had a forced fumble. And for the Bengals, Johnson, Atkins both had sacks, and then Hall and Nelson both had interceptions. Johnson also had a forced fumble, and Lemur had a forced fumble as well. Look at the team stats: 24 first downs for the Bengals, 21 first downs for the Cardinals. And on third down, the Cardinals 5 of 11, converting 45%. And for the Bengals, 5 of 13, converting 38%. They went for it once on fourth down. They did convert for 100% conversion rate on fourth. Then total net yards, 383 for the Cardinals, 377 for the Bengals. Net rushing, 99 for the Bengals, 82 for the Cardinals. And through the air, 301 netted for Arizona. Palmer sacked twice, losing 16 yards. And for the Bengals, 278 netted through the air, as Andy Dalton was sacked 4 times for 37 yards. And we look at the penalties in this game. It's really hurt the Bengals. 10 penalties, 108 penalty yards. In Arizona, 7 penalties for just 40 penalty yards. Both teams fumbled the ball 3 times. The Cardinals were able to recover all of them for their side, whereas the Bengals lost 1 fumble and recovered the other 2. And then we look at the red zone. Cincinnati 4 for 4. They were 100% in the red zone, as Eifert and Hill both had 2 red zone touchdowns apiece. And then for the Cardinals, 3 for 5, just 60% in the red zone. If they were able to convert those red zone opportunities into touchdowns that they had missed, this game wouldn't have been necessarily as close as it was. Of course, the Bengals defense was coming up pretty big in this game, although that's absent the third quarter, but the third quarter had happened. So 31 minutes and 15 seconds was the time of possession for Cincinnati, 28 minutes, 45 seconds for the Cardinals in possession time. But it was a wild game between 2 of the better teams in the NFL. These are 2 of the top dogs. They're both currently the number 2 seeds in their respective conferences. Of course, the Cardinals in the NFC and the Bengals in the AFC, and they're both 8-2 after this game. And this was a game really where someone had to win, someone had to lose, and both teams played good enough to win, but both teams made mistakes that could have cost them the game. And in the end, it was just a matter of timeliness. And the Bengals, as much as they were able to really come back from being down and from erasing that that third quarter deficit in the fourth, but then that late penalty was kind of, encapsulating the mistakes that they had made throughout the game. Whereas Arizona, their mistakes came early on, of course, those 2 interceptions, but Carson Palmer really showing a lot of resilience to really come up big in that third quarter. Obviously, those halftime adjustments really worked out for Arizona as they were able to take advantage in that third quarter, and Carson Palmer was able to find the open man, and that happened to be J.J. Nelson in this game. Fitzgerald also coming up very clutch on that final possession as he was able to make those 2 back-to-back big catches. Nelson also made a big catch early on in that drive on the first play, but Fitzgerald coming up big time to set up for that field goal. And of course, as I said, the mistake there, the penalty called on Pico, is both teams, were trying to get each other. You saw the Bengals, a lot of movement up there, but it was actually, how do they call that on Pico? But I guess he was calling out the signals. That at least is the word. And so that's why he was called on that one. But, it came down to that final play of the game, and really either team could have won this one. It could have went to overtime. We'll never know. If that, penalty had not been called, would Cantanzaro have made it? He may have. He very well likely would have made it either way. So you can't really, I wouldn't really blame Pico for that. I mean, it's the kind of thing where if he hadn't been called for it, if they had drawn the Bengals off sides, then you move them back, and now it's a 56-yarder, but instead he goes forward half the distance to the goal, and now it's a 32-yarder. And so it could have very easily, went the other way. And of course, also, after playing so good throughout that fourth quarter, and even they played really excellent in the first half, the Bengals defense holding them, the Cardinals to just 7 points in the first half. But then, that third quarter, but in the end there, when it counted the most, Carson Palmer coming up clutch, Fitzgerald as well. And that's the thing with Palmer. It really is a matter of they have so much talent at receiver. He just gets the ball to the different targets, whoever's open, because everybody's capable, and he also makes everyone around him look better. He's even throwing touchdowns, to rookies like David Johnson and to, Fells. So, he gets the ball to the open man. He's having a heck of a season, and Andy Dalton had a really good game as well. He did not turn the ball over. He had the fumble, but he did not throw any interceptions. And he put up pretty much the same numbers as Palmer with a little less, completion percentage-wise. But they really weren't being able to get too much going on the ground, at least consistency-wise. Hill did have the 2 touchdowns, but only 45 yards. And, Bernard had a huge game catching the ball out of the backfield, but only 18 yards on the ground. Dalton was their second leading rusher. So the Bengals, that's one thing that they need to work on is that ground game, and they got to get that ground game going, especially as it's getting into the colder months. In Arizona, if not for those early interceptions, and if, they would have actually maybe, gotten up to a bigger lead. So they look pretty good all around. Of course, letting the Bengals get back into it and tie the game up and almost letting this one get out of their hands. They are letting up some points with that defense, but they have a really excellent defense, and it's really a matter of just 2 of the best teams going at it. I mean, that's going to happen. Teams are going to score because they're just so evenly matched. But let me know what you think in the comments section below. Definitely interested to read your thoughts and opinions. Thank you very much for listening. It's greatly appreciated. I hope you're having a good day and had a great weekend and enjoyed all the sports.